welcome to the Blood Brothers podcast. We are here tonight with myself, Sean Coleman, Mr. Chris McDonald, and Mr. Rob Parker.
Hello.
And we are joined in our guest seat this evening by Mr. Christopher Brookmyre, who is author of inimitable novels that we both love and adore, and is here to talk to us this evening about The Cut, but will doubtless talk to us about every single other one.
As we Not every single other one. I mean, there's 26 now. I've got to get to my bed.
I was going to say, we have this pen for 17 hours, right? So
yes, it's an overnight booking. This recording, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they said. Chris, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Just before we started, Rob was saying the first crime book he'd bought was A Tale Etched in. He's holding it up right now.
I am. Yeah, holding it up right now. Yeah.
And I countered with I fell in love with All Fun and Games Until Somebody Loses an Eye. But also, where in that lineage did A Big Boy Did It and Ran Away? Was that?
It was before that. It was 2001. I think when it was, I should easily remember that it was published in 2001. I started writing it in 2000, and it was first published in Australia. It was published there ahead of everywhere else because I was going over to Australia and New Zealand to do a couple of festivals, and so the C formats, trade paperback export formats, were the ones that were exported out there rather than the hardbacks, and they went out there in, it was like August, I think, and it all went down fine. But they had a tagline on the back that said, "Terrorism, it's the new rock and roll."
Yeah, I remember.
This was
I remember it,
which seemed like a really good idea at the time.
And was suddenly hideously inappropriate.
Yes. August 2001, and
oh goodness
it was slated for publication late September 2001, and so the entire print run the hardbacks had to be rejacketed, which was less complex than all the C formats, which had to have their jackets ripped off, and they put a new back on it, so you can actually see one. If anyone's got one of the original print run. There's a weird kind of double line on the just to the inside of the spine that shows where they cut and put a different back cover on it.
Have to go and look
very rapidly in the space of about a fortnight. And the thing is, I came up with this tagline like way back when I was writing the book, and it was because it's about someone who's a kind of wannabe rock star, and someone who essentially, I mean, it was something I read when I was a kid. I read an interview with Joe Strummer, and he was talking about things like the Baader Meinhof gang and this kind of rock and roll trip that he thought a lot of the left-wing terrorists were on in the 70s. And so I had this thing in my head, terrorism is the new rock and roll, with people who were on a kind of massive power trip. People like David Koresh and Charles Manson, things like that. And that's what I was alluding to. And it sounded really cool as a tagline. Everyone loved it, obviously. Until about 2:00 in the afternoon of September 11, 2001, and at which point there was crisis phone calls coming in. So that's how I should remember immediately that it was 2001, that novel was.
Yeah. Does that mean that there's these copies knocking about? Did any actually slip the net that have that original tagline on the back?
Oh yeah, because there was loads of them sold in Australia.
Right.
Because I'd been over promoting it. So yeah,
of course,
still, every so often someone will turn up with one at an event.
And you sign it extra special and go, "I didn't mean that. I was only joking."
yeah, little arrow. Please excuse this part. That's incredible.
But nobody could have predicted that, surely.
Yes, no.
I just I remember reading them, and a bit like Rob had been in a bit of a reading slump, and I'd just finished doing my I don't know what I'm talking about. I'd long finished doing my degree in screenwriting, but I was a bit sort of funked out with sort of formulaic writing, and then for some, I think it might have even been the cover, and for some reason I picked up your book. It's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye, and started reading, and just thought, and this is what it's all about. This is writing. This is brilliant. I love it. It was that sort of, it's a bolshy. You're going to read Glaswegian whether you want to or not, and it's funny and it's criminal and it's I absolutely loved it, and I fell in love with your writing then, and I don't think that's changed to now. And I know your writing style and your characterization, everything's changed, but it's just, you can feel that flow, you can feel that person from back then.
I always take it as a huge compliment if someone said they were not reading for a while, and because every so often I've met someone who'll say they didn't read anything after school, because I think when I was at school I always described the prescribed reading list at the time as a kind of prescription to put kids off reading. Yeah, it was always, when I was growing up, it was always stuff that was very worthy, and it was sort of improving literature, and it wasn't going to give anyone the idea that literature was something for fun. That it, to my mind, books were in the same category as movies, TV shows, video games, and so they were a source of great entertainment and escapism, and that is not the impression that some of my classmates got. And so every so often I'll meet someone who had that kind of experience, and it's the great compliment if someone says, "Well, I read one of your books, and I didn't realise a book could be like that," and by that they meant enjoyable, rather than something kind of grim and worthy and all those things that education unfortunately can be.
I think for me it had been that I'd done sort of 3 years of a screenwriting degree, and then I was doing a master's in script writing for film and TV, and it was all just like, and this has got to be like that, and then it's all just perfunctory, and it's great for getting how to hone plot and all of that kind of nonsense, but it just ripped the heart out of writing for me. And what was interesting about your books was you just went, fuck it, this is a story and I'm telling it, and I loved that. I absolutely fell in love with it.
I think I remember as a student myself, saving certain books until all the essays were in and the term was over, and it was something that I was just going to read for its own pleasure and entertainment, and not to be in any way analysed or deconstructed. And the one I always remember was that I was saving was Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency by Douglas Adams. Brilliant. Back in about 1987, I think it was. And that didn't disappoint.
We haven't even got onto the cut yet, but I just wanted to add to that and ask for Chris's opinion on this. But I go to as many schools as I can, trying to get kids in the region I'm in, the Northwest, into reading and into writing, and believing that you can be from any sort of background and enjoy both of those things. Because I don't think, certainly growing up myself, I didn't feel like it was accessible. And I think we're on the cusp of something similar to that people didn't know that, like we were talking about, people didn't know that reading could be enjoyable. I think now people don't know that writing can be enjoyable at all. And in fact, I think the more that I go to schools, the more that the joy of creation is being sucked right out, right there in the classroom as well. And I'd love to get Chris McDonald's take on this. But like when I say to children stuff like, "Okay, kids, what's in a story?" And the stuff they come out with is so banal and like fronted adverbials, sir. That kind of thing. Like, come on, where's the fun of just making stuff up and having a good time and stuff like that?
What the fuck is the fronted adverbial?
I don't know, but it's like, I'll ask you, Chris, have you ever, when you've sat down to write something, have you ever counted how many fronted adverbials have gone into it?
I have absolutely no notion. I keep seeing reference to this stuff. I don't know what a fronted adverbial is.
Exactly.
I wouldn't fronted adverbial if it came and kicked me in the front at adverbials.
There was a moment in the mid-90s when really in the aftermath of Trainspotting first being published, that suddenly there was people from all sorts of backgrounds feeling like their voices were legitimate, their accents were legitimate and the type of stories they wanted to tell were legitimate for literature. And it fueled a real explosion of kind of vernacular type literature, but not just that. It made, whether it was just people writing short stories at home, people did feel legitimized to just have a go. And I think they got pleasure out of seeing the language they like to use, the slang they like to use. Because at school, when I was growing up, it was kind of like an exercise in trying to drive the slang terms out of you. Whereas what's needed is to say, no, that's language, that's evolving language. That's how you tell stories. That's how you write. Because people think writing is about flowery prose or writing a specific type of writing. So unfortunately, I think that moment, it's not past altogether, but there was a great flowering of literature as a result of it. And obviously, I don't think it's not the same in Scotland in terms of the education principles, but certainly everything I'm getting the impression they're trying very hard to drive all creativity out of the classrooms.
Yes, yeah.
In case anybody has an idea that's subversive.
Interestingly, like when I was growing up, they did that with art. Like, or art had to be a certain thing, and they'd give you these topics, and if you went anywhere off piste and didn't do a still life but did a sort of abstract, and I was like, "Oh, that's not what we asked for." And it's like, nowhere in the brief did it say still life, but because you said a jug and two vases, and I've drawn some jugs. That's not what we want now for.
Sorry.
I wasn't. Honestly,
my mind went there. No, when you said you'd drawn some jugs. Sorry.
Potty brain, unbelievable.
Because actually this is actually, I know it's me being puerile, but it does kind of feed into what I was talking about encouraging kids. And it might be that what they find puerile is the thing they want to create at a certain age.
Yes.
And I remember I got into trouble at school because I was writing a short story for English, and I was very bloody minded. I used to write, I hated censoring myself, and just to prove the point, I wrote 2 versions of a short story, and it wasn't even that short. It was like a very, very long essay assignment. But I'd written this kind of espionage story, and I didn't want it sort of tamed by having to use censored language. So this is how bloody minded I was. I wrote the whole thing out longhand twice. One with the acceptable version, and one the version that had all the swearing in it and all sorts of other things in it. And I submitted them both to my teacher and explained why I was doing it. I said, here's the version that will be acceptable to the school, but here's the version that I would like to be read. And she just discarded the sort of clean one and went away with it. But she then came out and said, she said this was the best essay I'd written, and it was the best thing she read in a long time. And she said, can I hang on to it and give it to the head of the department? And she did, but the problem was, it's when she gave it to the head of the department, she phrased it really badly. She said, I think you should take a look at this. And that's all she said. Didn't say, I think you should take a look at this. It's really good.
It's the best thing I've ever read.
Hands over this essay, this short story that is not only full of swearing, there's actually at one point a reference to necrophilia, which did not go down well in a West of Scotland Catholic school. But what was worse was that everyone found out about this. And so all the guys, and most of the guys were getting all excited in the class. The guys who paid no attention to these things, they were all saying, oh, well, if I'm writing the next essay question, I'm writing loads of swearing, and I'm going to write a story that's full of fuck this and cunt that. And this freaked out the English department as well. They said, well, if we let you away with it, we'll have to let everyone away with it. And I'm thinking, has it not actually occurred to you this is the first time you've ever heard some of these kids talk with enthusiasm about the prospect of writing?
You are so right. Exactly. You're so right, man.
No, of course,
that's not where it went.
I think when I it's amazing that, because I try to let them. I've developed this workshop thing that I do, and I try to let them just go and do whatever you want, and then we create a story on the spot, and you would be like, the directions this goes in, and so in there they want to do it, like you said, like if you can find that kernel of passion. And some of the story ideas that have come out, I mean, like some of them have been like, well, I'm stealing that, that kind of thing. Get home.
What you're supposed to be there for, Rob.
Yeah, I know. It's not. But oh no, it's absolutely mad. But and then you do get a glut of poop stuff. Definitely, they always want. I think a personal favorite was two WWF wrestlers in a pooping competition on Mars. Was a huge highlight of mine.
What age group? What age group are you working with?
This kid was 7, I think. But yeah,
poop is high in the 7-year-old's repertoire.
Yeah, well, it's then when you get into the confusing years of teenage life that's when I get thrown and I'm off kilter. So I've got no background in poetry whatsoever, but I was asked to run a poetry thing, and this kid put his hand up and said, I talked it through with him, just say, go from your heart, go with whatever you want, whatever feels good, try and find a little rhythm within yourself. And he said, I'd like to read it out, and he read out, and it was pure filth. I mean, it was it was just absolute filth, and it was called something my biscuit, and it was about, I dunk you in my hotspot, and I put you slow. It was I can't even say it, but about warm fluid sliding everywhere was the main context here, and it was just.
Reminds me.
I had to leave. I had to go. Like, I can't. You're doing so well, man. I gotta go
though. that reminds me of the first week of homeschooling I did with my girlfriend's kids, and we were. The 12-year-old is in his first year at high school, and he came down. We're all sitting at the same tables. The 8-year-old, the sister's there, and he says, "We've got the science quiz, but I don't want to do it in front of my sister." And I'm like, "Come on, it's only science. Come on, what are we doing? She's doing flowers. What are you doing?" And he just showed me, and they basically had a whole bunch of little cards that you had to cut out and then rearrange. The man slides his into the woman's, and because we had to do it all in the same room, we basically came up with all sorts of euphemisms, like the man drives his car into the woman's garage repeatedly until he's parked it correctly, and then the car leaks a little.
Oh God!
God, please don't answer the science quiz like this. This is going to be the worst thing that's ever happened in your school career. Is it right? We'll go downstairs to the office and we'll talk about this seriously. Because I can't have the car driving metaphor going on and on. But
no, that could derail the young man permanently, couldn't it? Really?
Unbelievable.
So I mean, we've the cut, Chris.
Yes.
See, this is what happens when Chris McDonald leaves the environment. We just go into random free fall, and we haven't got a teacher.
Excited. Like, I get excited about talking to an author I admire. I get really excited about that. But so yes, the cut. Could you tell us a little bit about the cut, please, Chris?
Yeah, well, it's about a woman called Millicent Spark, who's a 72-year-old ex-con, and actually a suicidal 72-year-old ex-con who has kind of lost all of her will to live, essentially. She can't readjust to life on the outside. She served 25 years in prison, and she's unable to adjust to life outside, and she's thinking about killing herself until she kind of rediscovers her joy of life through a relationship with her new 18-year-old flatmate who's a student. Or when I say that rediscovers the joy of life through the two of them investigating the mystery behind the murder for which she was convicted back in the 90s. And that mystery concerns the legend of a lost horror film, a film that was never released. The legend said that it was so disturbing and so terrifying that the producers didn't want to release it, and they burned the negative in the presence of a priest. And so there's this legends around this missing film, including the fact that it's a legend that anyone who saw it died. And the director committed suicide. The producer was missing, presumed drowned. Another person involved was murdered. A distributor was threw himself in front of a train. And Millicent Spark, who was the makeup special effects artist, she ended up in prison for murder. So there's all these things associated with this mysterious movie, but really it's about someone discovering that even though she's lost 25 years to jail, that there's still life in front of her, that life is still worth living. So it's about her rediscovering her optimism, and it's about Jerry, the student, getting over his sense of profound imposter syndrome. He's a working class kid who's gone to university and doesn't think he belongs because everyone else there is posher than him, more confident than him, speaks better than him, and he's just waiting to get flung out. And he's starting to self-sabotage. You know, he's got a sort of petty criminal background, and he's starting to slip back into that. And he realizes a part of him is putting himself in a position where he'll get flung out because that way it's not his decision, until he has to go and live with Millicent. And it's my wife gave me the idea by telling me about a project in Scandinavia whereby students get cheap, good accommodation by going to live with older people.
I read about that.
They'll offer this free accommodation, and it's so that there's this continuing connection between the generations. So they get cheap accommodation. They're not there to be at the service of the people they're living with. They're just there to spend a certain amount of time with them. And it's one of those things, you hear this idea and immediately think, wow, imagine like this cross-generational relationship. They team up to fight crime. You know, that's the first thing is into my head. And so it's stuck with me for a while. And I thought, well, what would be the story about that would bind these two people? And that's why I came up with the idea of someone who had lost everything, in a way, lost the best years of her life. And also, I always try and find a vehicle to write about stuff that I'm passionate about. So that's why it's about exploitation cinema and horror movies, and going back to the 80s and 90s, and in fact beyond that, all the way back to like the Italian giallo cinema as well. No
way, that's amazing. Is that something that, you know, personally you're into, Chris, the horror movies and stuff?
I'm not like a sort of aficionado really, but I mean, I grew up in the 80s with part of the generation that was first to get home video. We got VCRs, and it was that generation when there was not only were we given access to home video, it was unregulated for this kind of glorious period, because the current legislation didn't cover a lot of stuff when videos first started appearing. So we all just watched horror films because these were the films you couldn't have got in to see at the cinema if you were 13. So there was so much of a sort of trade in pirated horror movies, which you saw sixth generation copies. It was really fuzzy and
and glitchy. Do you remember when it would just be like
no matter how much you played with the tracking button,
you'd know something horrible was about to happen because it did that, and that's because people had replayed the horrible bit so many times.
Or when you knew something sexy was going to happen, it would just
but there's that too.
I remember a time when we didn't have a VCR in the house, but you could rent the VCR machine from the video shop at the same time as you rented your tapes.
Oh wow!
And then you'd bring it back because we didn't have a VCR, but you could rent the machine, and then it's huge, like a bloody suitcase. The whole back of the car was taken up with the VCR machine, and then your one tape. And a terrible horror that we used to watch with my parents.
I love all that old tech, though. All that old tech is so exciting to me. I mean, I think I'd love to write something set in that period, but because my I remember my granddad having a camcorder that was essentially a VCR in a box that had a handle and then leading up to the camera unit as well, and thinking how cool that was. You know, I love all that stuff so much. And again, like having young children now, like they haven't got a clue. They can't understand that that things didn't used to be on demand. They can't work it out at all. There are like literal meltdowns when the internet is down.
Well, I wanted to write a wee bit about that culture, you know, that what it felt like at that time, how there was something kind of forbidden about it, and also about the government response and the moral panic that ensued in the 80s, the video nasty moral panic. And so the book deals with that, and to some extent Millicent, one of the reasons she ends up sentenced to such a long time is because there's this climate of hysteria, and there was a need for scapegoats really at the time. I mean, people went to jail just for who ran video shops because they were renting out movies that had been put on the Directors of Prosecution's banned list. I mean, it's an amazing documentary about it by I think by Jake West, called Video Nasty's moral panic and censorship, I think it's called. You look up something called Video Nasties, The Complete Guide is the name of the box set, and it's got all sorts of material in there. But I wanted to write about that culture at the time, but also about a time when you couldn't verify information quickly. So that's how myths develop around a film.
Yeah.
People would now, if you could very quickly find out that some story about a film was complete rubbish. Whereas back then you would hear these rumors about something and you couldn't verify one way or another. There'd be some old magazine article that was the source of what information you could find. So I wanted to write about that as well, that sense of the forbidden, that sense of trying to search for movies. As you say, it's nowadays anything you want to find, if you can't find it to stream online in 20 seconds, it probably isn't available anywhere. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. It's that sort of interesting. I remember when I was at uni in the very early 90s, and everybody was like, there's this movie, I Spit on Your Grave, and it's a whole bunch of those things that were banned and therefore really amazing. And you're like, they're not amazing, they're just shit. But they're banned, so they're really amazing. And all of the people in the media course were trying to recreate those video nasties, which is basically where they'd come out of. It's a completely fascinating era.
I agree totally. Are you okay, Chris?
Yeah, it's just, I think it's a very noisy motorbike went past and a condenser microphone, and it seemed to pick up all this, and it just got louder and louder and louder, and something I looked, and I was thinking, I thought for a second one of you had put something on a kind of sharing screen thing that involved, it sounded like the rising score on a horror film just for a moment.
Oh Jesus! I thought there had been a terrible outbreak of flatulence behind you, and you were checking to see whether it had been picked up on the microphone.
Just seeing if any of the microphone settings help with that. But
no, I remember when I went to film school in early 2000. It was early 2000, sorry, and they had a VHS library, and it was full of all of that stuff. And it was like I went on this like mad voyage to try and get a hold of all the video nasties I could, because they'd been so pilloried in the press growing up that I went hunting. And yeah, you get a lot of varying quality in that period as well, don't you? For sure. But yeah. I think like I always think this, and we're going into a chat about the wider cinema here, but I always think like I will let any kind of shonky effect get away with it if the story backs it up, and if the story works. You can get away with so much with me if the story works. So anyway, that's a wider question. Sorry.
No, but just practical effects though, even though some of them would work or some wouldn't, and I think the lower visual quality meant that you couldn't always see how the effects were done, whereas it would be less forgiving now in sort of HD.
Super HD.
That was Whereas at the time, it was that's one of the things I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about the ingenuity of creating these illusions, and that's why Millicent. She is a special effects makeup artist, so her job was to create these gory illusions. And so it's an excuse to write about that, because it's something I've kept coming back to, with whether it was things like The Sacred Art of Stealing or Snowball in Hell, writing about illusions, about magic. But it's the same thing. It's the same principles of conjuring and illusion that are used for practical effects.
It was reminiscent for me of the sort of the 1930s illusionists and the sleight of hand and the just trying to use your wit and understanding of human perception to outwit your audience. And I love that intelligence in a character that you almost immediately go, there's no problem, she's going to solve this mystery because she's smart enough to outwit everybody, so we're fine. It's amazing piece of characterization, I thought, with Millicent.
Thank you.
This is a tale of the supernatural.
The Tapes, a podcast of the uncanny.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Join me, host Christopher Goldie, and guests as we discuss the best in unsettling television and film.
Who is this? Who is coming?
Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitter and Instagram. Search for @TheTapesPod. Part of the Pod Dojo Network.
To look at your career in a wider picture, Chris, but something I always think of when I look at your body of work is variety. And the fact that you seem to, and it's certainly something that I aspire to, is that, no, I want to write about that. And you will write about it. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I always get, and when I listen to you and when we've spoken on previous interviews and stuff, I always get that impression that it's like, no, my interest is hooked here and I want to write about that. And is that how you go about picking your projects?
I think so. You're never quite sure where the idea is going to come from and how it's going to hook you. But I think it like comes back to the research question. People are asking how you research something. I always find it's easier if you decide to write about something you already know about, so you don't have to do much research. You know, that your research is the years before, when you spent time reading about something just because you were really fascinated by it. And you weren't reading it for research, you were reading it just because it was interesting. And that way you've got a kind of grounding in the subject. But I suppose as a part of you is always, as soon as something's intriguing, there's a wee part of my brain thinking, how can I turn this into a story? So that definitely comes into play. I remember when I became fascinated with the investigations into the paranormal, and I read everything I could get my hands on with regards to that. And there was a point where I just suddenly thought, this is so fascinating. But sometimes you read something that's fascinating and think, well, I don't see how this fits into a narrative. But with the paranormal stuff, what I realized was this is detective fiction, because it's all about investigating how somebody is perpetrating a fraud. Because, you know, it's well, to some extent you're talking about creating an illusion, but it's a fraud because it's the psychics and mediums are trying to tell you it's not an illusion. They're trying to tell you, I am in touch with the other side. So
I think it's an incredible thing that's like I worked on 7 series of Most Haunted, and what I and we did the lives in those the 7 series of lives, and what was fascinating was that it hit an audience square bang in the middle of people who believed and people who just thought it was an absolute rip-roaring laugh to watch. And they both enjoyed it with the same kind of passion and would come along to the lives. And again, you're back to the sort of puerile, we're on Hampstead Heath searching for Dick on the day we were looking for Dick Whittington, and everybody's like, ooh, yeah, we were all searching for Dick. Oh God.
I always forget that, Sean, that you were on that show for 7 years. That's incredible.
Yeah, no,
Incredible.
but it was an eye opener. But what it is, it's exactly what you're saying, Chris. Is that it's just a mystery, and everybody wants to explain the unexplainable, and even when you've worked on it for ages, and you're like, it's collective shit up. You know, it's collective shit up because you spend all day in a pub being told ghost stories from every single local resident who's ever seen or heard anything ghostly ever. And then you spend the night there with all the lights turned off and you're shooting everything in 0 lux. So everything's sort of green and a bit fuzzy, and the coffee machine comes on, the red light fucks up, and everybody's screaming, and bang, you've got your trailer. There's no ghosts. But you're done. Show's done.
But did you ever see anything doing that you couldn't explain?
Well, I couldn't explain why certain of the psychic mediums wanted to press their genitalia against the leaded windows, but that's not that's not something that could be aired anywhere. But it did make people scream, which was good for the trailer. It's I couldn't say one way or the other. It would be I'm sure
there might have to be some after recording discussions on this one, I think, because I always forget about that. We never talk about it.
It's a shocker.
The question of research ties in neatly, kind of, if I do a seamless segue to a question. We have some questions from listeners for you, Chris, if that's okay. This one is from Louise Fairbairn, it's lovely to have your words with us tonight, Louise. Louise would like to know, what's your, Chris, favourite random fact about James Simpson you and Marissa uncovered in the research for the Ambrose Parry novels? The segue here being research.
Excellent, Rob. Well done.
Thank you.
Good question. And yeah, I know Louise very well. So hi, Louise. There's quite a wealth of little nuggets of information, all of which Marissa has uncovered. But a couple that really stick in the mind is that Simpson was notorious for, he grew up in very modest circumstances. He was the son of a baker, but he made quite a bit of money in medicine quite quickly. But he was someone who clearly, once he had enough money, he wasn't pursuing it, and it didn't really mean anything to him. And on one occasion, it turned out it was the butler would find these things. He'd found that Simpson had stopped a window sash from rattling by putting a rolled up £10 note in it. Right, so, and you think what £10 would have been worth in the 1840s, and he'd seen a rolled up £10 note just to stop the window rattling. But also, Simpson would go around. He was a great amateur archaeologist. He was really interested in archaeology. In fact, there's a scene in the new book about his interest in archaeology. But he would go around sites and he'd find little things like old arrowheads and things like that. But it turned out he would wrap them in high denomination notes so that the butler didn't chuck them out when he went through his pockets. Because one of the butler's jobs was to go through his pockets, because he would go to do clinics or go and perform operations for people, and they'd pay him, but he'd forget, so he'd have the money in his pocket, he'd hang up his coat and just forget about the money, and the butler, one of his jobs was to go and get the money. But so he knew that if the arrowhead he had found in some field was wrapped in a £10 note, the butler would know from doing that he wanted to hang on to the arrowhead. It wasn't just to get chucked in the bin.
It's brilliant.
Superb. Louise actually has another, a second part to her question is, well, it's entirely another direction. She'd like to know, are we going to get another Jack Parlerbane novel at some point?
Oh, inevitably. But I don't have immediate plans. I mean, the new Ambrose Parry book will be out in August, so that's all done. I'm writing another standalone novel at the moment. What happens after that? Well, we've got the next Ambrose Parry book.
Yeah.
You know what that's dealing with, actually. Marissa's got already a wealth of material that we're going to look into. But yeah, I think Jack will be back.
Fabulous.
He's never been away for that long. I don't know how many books in a row have ever gone without writing about him. It probably is the longest run at the moment, simply because I've been so prolific in the last few years.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps if there's two of you, I must say.
Well, on that topic of, you said Marissa had a lot of material on that one already. The lovely Marion Todd would like to know, the level of technical detail in Want You Gone, hacking, etc., was outstanding. How do you know so much about this stuff?
This always sounds like a loaded question.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that a number of times.
Yeah.
Essentially, it comes down to always having a fascination with kind of computer culture and what I would call hacking culture, because hacking culture didn't always mean what it means now. Hacking culture just one time referred to kind of just computer enthusiasts and people who like tinkering with code or tinkering with the machinery of it. And my involvement with computers goes right back to the early 80s and getting at a ZX Spectrum, one of the first ones, rubber keys, and friends who had a ZX81, so I was sort of into the kind of whole computer geeky culture way back then, and I watched it evolve. And I also, when I first got a PC in the sort of mid-90s and got very into the sort of putative or burgeoning early days, the online culture of gaming at the time, which was mostly online gaming was around Quake and Quake 2. And so you tinkered with stuff all the time, but again, you're staying in touch with this. And I think that was the technical side of it, but the other side of it was just always a fascination with what we've just talked about, the psychology of illusions. And to me, it was kind of the same. And heist stories, I always loved heist stories. To me, heists and hacks are the same thing. It's all works on the same principles. And I wanted to write a story that pulled all that together. So I did some research in terms of I read quite a few books about things like Anonymous and Lulsec and some of the sort of online cyber activism of the sort of mid 2000s and things like that. But really, it was just a combination of all these factors, and also being really paranoid about my personal security, and thinking, as a crime writer, you're always thinking of how could you manipulate someone, how could you con them into giving you information they shouldn't, and that's why you get to admire it when it's being done by a hacker. So I've never actually hacked anything. Obviously, I would say that I'm not very technically adept, but the thing that fascinated me about it that I was able to write about and want you going is that people think hacking is all about computers and it's all about code, and it's not. It's all about getting someone to tell you their password so that you don't need to fart about with code.
It's all about social engineering.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's just, how can I trick you into thinking I'm a person that you can let in, or how can I get on your network the easy way? Get the most random receptionist who's there on a work experience day, who's connected to the Wi-Fi, find her Instagram, get her password, and bing bang bong, you're into the biggest company
incrementally.
you want.
Incrementally, it's like you get one little bit so that lets you get the next level of security. That, and it builds. And one of the things I wanted to write about and what you go on is that perception, the stereotype of the computer geek being socially inept, when actually the hacker is socially adept, because the hacker has to be really good at reading people to get
and really
them
good at being people. That's what I
being
did
people
in the code. Was they just and I spent ages researching the code and working with hackers, and my entire perception of hackers changed because everybody I met was more sociable, more personable, and could psychoanalyze the arse off you in about 3 seconds. And I was just expecting sort of the guy from IT, which is unfair because I was Commodore 64 and spent one summer of my childhood, three weeks, I think I spent programming in C Basic, my Commodore 64, to play the tune of Michael Rode the Boat Ashore. And then hit run. I think 90 pages of C plus code.
Goodness me, man.
And I hit run and it went dee 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 dee. And I was like, there's not even a fucking hallelujah. I'm not meant for this shit. 3 weeks of hanging out in the sun and playing on my bike that I've just ruined. I didn't even get a hallelujah. I'm fucking out. So I knew I was never going to be a hacker, but I was always fascinated by, just that life and that lifestyle and that understanding of how people work, and as social media has evolved. And I remember talking to one of them, one of the guys who had been tried and convicted and had done some terrible stuff, but was just like, but everybody complained, everybody was protesting, everybody was up in arms about ID cards, and you're not having my photo and my date of birth on the same document. And back in the 90s, and then nobody wanted ID cards to be brought in. And then Facebook pops up, and then every fucking thing about you is on the internet for any old turd to read. But no, there's no way that in my pocket I'm going to have a photo ID with my date of birth and my address on it. Right?
Yeah,
okay, but you'll give every other thing, all of your family members, the details of where your friends work, everything away. Everybody tickling away on their which polar cat are you? Games and quizzes, and you're like, well, this is just us harvesting your information. Go ahead, fill out the quiz.
I get a thing with infinity. I can't think about infinity, so I can't, because it's just too big for me to contemplate. And the idea of the literal black hole of information that we're funneling into Facebook all the time. I don't mean us three. I just mean the wider human population of all of that kind of stuff and what pictures are building up. I get that same feeling like, whoa, that kind of thing. I have to stop. But I'm going to carry on with another seamless segue because we've got another question. See that? I'm learning it. Chris is usually the man who keeps us in track, but we've got Chris Scotland, a big fan and friend of the podcast, who says, when bringing back Yeah. When bringing back a recurring character, how much backstory can you recall, and how much rereading of your own work is involved?
God, it all depends on how long it's been since the last book, I suppose. When I wrote 3 Parlabane books pretty much back to back, and that was a bit easier because I was kind of rebooting the character. But it is tricky. When I wrote A Snowball in Hell, that's one of the few occasions when I have actually reread one of my own novels after it's been published. Obviously, you read your own novel several times, the editing and proofing stages. But I had to reread The Sacred Art of Stealing because it was about 5 or 6 years after that I was writing A Snowball in Hell, and it was eye-opening to actually remind myself about who the characters were. But it was good because enough time had passed. I didn't want to just be writing the next episode. I wanted to feel like the characters would have moved on and developed in the meantime. I suppose what freaks me out is that I'm doing events and people remember things about my characters that I don't. So they'll ask me something about it and I'm like, I've no idea. And I think perhaps people forget that they read this book last month and I wrote it 10 years ago. So,
Yeah.
in fact, somebody had my novel, it was the Parlabane novels as their specialist subject on Mastermind.
No way.
And I think they got more than me by by several points. I'm sitting watching this thing and I wonder how I'll do here,
That's got to be one of the, we've not had anyone on this show, Sean, who's been the subject of a Mastermind.
I've never had anyone be the subject of it. I've talked to somebody who was the subject of a pointless question, but that was less good for them because it meant that nobody knew them. If you're a pointless answer on a pointless question, then basically notoriety hasn't struck.
We have one more question from the internet ether, which is from our good friend Dan Stubbings. Hiya, Dan, who asks, how the hell did you come up with the ending for Black Widow? Because Jesus, it was a masterpiece.
That's true. That is true. That was brilliant.
Oh, thank you. I honestly can't remember. I think. Well, I suppose with this kind of thing, you start with the ending. You start with the thing that's to be revealed. And I can't really say much more than that because when you're creating something that is so spoiler sensitive, I have had 2 ambitions with that book, which I was able to realize. And one was, and this is going to make it seem like we planned this. I mentioned way back in our discussion, I mentioned Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And ever since reading that, it's a novel that I read and then immediately reread because it's such a great premise, but when you read it a second time, it was like reading another book, as if certain things in it had been written for those who'd read the book already and would see scenes from a completely different perspective. And I always wanted to write a book that you could read again and every scene would feel fresh because you were seeing it with fresh eyes. And that's what I feel like I did with Black Widow. And obviously it's what you find out. I don't like twists in books where it's just new information. I think the best twist is a twist that changes how you perceive all the information that's there already, especially if you suddenly think, God, I wasn't cheated. It was all right there. And it was right in front of the characters as well as in front of the reader. But the other ambition I had, I can't say what that was because it's a huge spoiler. But I did that as well.
I really love that that Dirk Gently was such an influence because my first writing gig was with Douglas, and he'd set up a company to do the Hitchhiker's Guide online version, which was basically the black box online, and he wasn't massively feeling it, so he hired me and he hired my friend Neil, who then hired me to sit and do it, and we would just sit in a room and make all this stuff up, and every now and then he'd come in and just be like, this is great, this is brilliant, not abstract enough, and then just blow your mind with pure creativity, and then go, I can't do it, guys, you go ahead. and then just walk out again, and you'd be like, whew, that's a lot to live up to. Here we go. Here we go again. Summon it from some. And it was just incredible. And I mean, he passed away unfortunately before it hit the airs. But when we did a PC game called Starship Enterprise, which was also with him. That was also ridiculous. But in that phase before game consoles and everything came up, when PC gaming was the thing, so it all sort of comes back round to that. It's just having somebody who kind of understands writing and character and writing for the reader, writing for the audience, and not just knocking something out.
He did text-only computer games back in the 80s as well, didn't he? He did, was not a game called Bureaucracy that he was responsible for? Yeah. I
mean, but all of it, and he worked, his company, which was, it was basically DNA. It was just a whole bunch of people who still are heavily invested in his estate, who were part of those original. And everything was burgeoning. I remember when we did Hitchhiker's Guide online. I'm sorry, it just sort of gets off tangent, but it was basically Wikipedia before Wikipedia. And then it was bought by the BBC, and the BBC were like, oh no, you can't have, because we had all these entries in Douglas's style, and then it opened up to a sort of crowdsourced encyclopedia of facts. So sometimes there'd be a description of Table, which was a creature that would freeze when anybody entered the room, and would therefore seem static and would stay static, and then would lie recumbent with its legs in the air when people weren't in the room, and the BBC were like, no, people will think this is real, and you're like, no, well, you're just idiots, because now what you've done is you've censored it and made it into a dictionary, which is not what it is.
Yeah.
and it took the heart out of it, but it was the
meaning of life as well. Which, exactly. There's actually, I still think all the time of the things that were defined in the meaning of life. I will think of those concepts and remember the words for them.
Yeah.
Because,
and then use them as actual definitions.
Yeah. One I think of frequently is a lumness, which was the pleasing coolness on the reverse side of a pillow.
Yeah. But
there should be a word for that.
I bet the Germans have a word for it. I bet they do.
Yeah, but it's probably like 7 words just squished into one cool-sided pillow.
Yeah.
But do you not, when you turn your pillow over and you feel the pleasing coolness, do you not just go, lumness?
Right, yeah, I think of Douglas Adams every time I do that. And actually, there's a whole section in the meaning of life about corridor etiquette. About how far along you have to pretend not to see someone, and then so that you can both look up at the same time.
Welcome to the
BBC. Very cool.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely charming and inspirational. I'm honoured.
What are you reading at the moment, Chris?
Nothing. I'm sorry to say, because I'm in the middle of writing a novel, so I don't read any fiction while I'm writing.
Oh wow!
I just find it too distracting. It's like something's got a narrative voice. I don't want that in my head, because anytime in between, I'm thinking about my own story and I'm thinking about those characters. So, I mean, I the pleasure of a complete glut of reading in the months leading up to Christmas before I started really properly developing this. But so I'm trying to think what I've read of late that I absolutely loved was probably most recently the new Mick Herron book, Slough House, which was
brilliant.
And also it's a fantastic oral history of the movie Dazed and Confused,
interesting,
called All Right, All Right, All Right. And I can't remember the author's name, which is terrible, but it was brilliant, absolutely fantastic. I mean, obviously, you've got to be a big fan of Dazed and Confused. You're not going to give a fuck, but it was absolutely fantastic. It was one of those years thinking, I'm going to be reading this book every 5 years for the rest of my life, every so often as a book like that comes along.
That's amazing. What about you, Sean? What are you reading at the moment?
I've just I've been doing reading a whole lot of submissions for Red Dog, so I just finished this at lunchtime today. I finished one called New Brighton by Helen Trevorrow, which is gonna I think by the time this episode comes out, we'll have announced that we've signed her, because fuck me, it's a good book.
Fabulous,
It's
man. Fabulous.
it's like The Handmaid's Tale meets the Hunger Games, but set in Brighton, and
Sounds ace.
it's bastard brutal but brilliant. And
I'll be
yeah,
looking out for that.
bastard brutal but brilliant. There you go. My
That's
3
it.
Bs.
That's the one up on the top of the book there on the jacket. Bang that on there. Oh well,
Bastard brutal but brilliant, set in Brighton.
yeah.
Based in Brighton. I've got 5 Bs. Well done.
For myself, I'm just reading Russ Thomas's Night Hawking, which is the sequel to Fire Watching that came out last year, and it's superb. It's
It would be.
It's almost at the point of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's so acutely enjoyable to read. That I keep finding myself making excuses to sneak a couple of pages here and there, like, don't worry, children, I'm just going to go, I'll go get the ice lollies, don't worry. And the book is by the freezer, ready for me to sneak a couple of pages. So it's, and by the time this comes out, that will be out. So happy publication day, Russ, as well. Super stuff. And we've had you for an hour, Chris.
Yeah.
And now it's just jetted by. Thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining. And sorry that we could only have one Chris in the room at any time. But thank God you jettisoned the other one. Otherwise, it would have just been the 3 of us.
Yeah. Well, he did send text us his apologies. He said he can't even get on Zoom at all, so he might be having a difficult night. But and it's a shame as well, because I know he was really interested and excited to talk to you about the cut as well. So, Chris, you'll just have to tune in, mate.